I never thought I'd marry into billions. When I met Jonathan at that coffee shop, I had no idea his family would try everything to destroy me. They called me a gold digger, threatened me, even offered me money to disappear. But what they discovered about me changed everything. If you want to hear how I proved them all wrong and shocked an entire billionaire family, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. This is my story, and it's about to get wild. Let me take you back to where it all started. I was 26 years old, working as a barista at Bella's Coffee House in downtown Cleveland. Now, this wasn't just any coffee shop. It was in the heart of the business district, where men in $1,000 suits would rush in every morning, order their lattes, and disappear into their glass towers. I'd been working there for 3 years, and honestly, most of these customers barely looked at me. I was just another face behind the counter, someone to hand them their caffeine fix before they went on to make their millions. But I had dreams, big ones. Every night after my shift, I'd go home to my tiny one-bedroom apartment and work on my business plan. I was studying business administration through night classes, and I had this vision of starting my own tech company. I know it sounds crazy, a barista from Cleveland, wanting to break into Silicon Valley, but I believed in myself, even when nobody else did. My mama raised me to be strong. She worked 3 jobs to put me through college, and she always told me, "Baby, don't let anyone tell you what you can't do because of where you come from or what you look like." Those words were about to be tested in ways I never imagined. It was a Tuesday morning in September when Jonathan first walked into my life. I remember it so clearly because it was raining, and most of our usual customers had called in their orders for delivery. The coffee shop was unusually quiet, and I was restocking the pastry case when I heard the door chime. I looked up and saw this tall, handsome man shaking the rain off his umbrella. He was different from our usual customers, not just because he was incredibly good-looking, but because he actually smiled at me. A real smile. Not the fake courtesy smile I usually got. "Good morning," he said, approaching the counter. "I'm not from around here. What would you recommend?" Most customers knew exactly what they wanted and rattled off their orders like robots. But here was this man, asking for my opinion. I found myself actually thinking about it. "Well, if you want something smooth and rich, I'd go with our house blend with a splash of vanilla cream. But if you're feeling adventurous, our cinnamon spice latte is incredible." He smiled wider. "I like adventurous. Cinnamon spice latte it is." As I prepared his drink, we started talking. His name was Jonathan, and he was in town for business meetings. He asked about my recommendations for lunch spots, local attractions, and we somehow ended up discussing books. I mentioned I was reading The Lean Startup for one of my classes, and his eyes lit up. "You're studying business?" he asked, genuine interest in his voice. "Night school," I admitted, feeling a little embarrassed. "I'm working on my degree while saving up to start my own company someday." Instead of the polite nod I expected, he leaned forward. "What kind of company?" For the next 20 minutes, I found myself telling this stranger about my dreams of creating technology that could help small businesses compete with larger corporations. He listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and when I handed him his latte, he said something that changed everything. "I think you're going to do incredible things. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." He came back the next day, and the day after that. Each time, we'd talk a little longer. I learned he was from New York, worked in investments, and had this easy way of making me laugh. On his 4th visit, he asked me out. "I know this might seem forward," he said, running his hand through his dark hair nervously. "But would you maybe want to have dinner with me tonight? Somewhere casual, nothing fancy." I said yes, and that night, over pizza, at a small Italian place downtown, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Jonathan didn't just talk to me, he listened. He was interested in my thoughts, my dreams, my opinions about everything from politics to what makes a perfect pizza. He told me about his love of hiking, his passion for sustainable energy, and how he sometimes felt trapped by expectations. We dated for 3 months before I realized just how wealthy he was. I knew he had money. His clothes were expensive. He always paid for everything without looking at prices. And he mentioned traveling frequently for work. But I assumed he was just well off, maybe a successful businessman. I had no idea I was dating Jonathan Wellington III, heir to one of the largest fortunes in America. The truth came out by accident. We were at my apartment watching a movie when his phone rang. He stepped out to take the call. And when he came back, he looked troubled. "Everything okay?" I asked. He sat down heavily beside me. "I need to tell you something. About my family, about who I am." He paused, searching for words. "My full name is Jonathan Wellington III. My family owns Wellington Industries." I stared at him blankly for a moment. The name sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. Then it hit me like a lightning bolt. Wellington Industries was one of the biggest conglomerates in the country. They owned everything from hotels to tech companies to real estate empires. I'd studied them in one of my business classes as an example of generational wealth. You're a billionaire," I whispered. "My family is. Technically, I will be." He looked at me anxiously. "Does that change anything between us?" Honestly, it was overwhelming. Here I was, a barista from Cleveland, who grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment with my single mother. And I was dating someone who probably had more money than I could even comprehend. But looking at Jonathan, seeing the worry in his eyes, that I might treat him differently, I realized something important. For 3 months, he'd been just Jonathan to me. Sweet, funny, thoughtful Jonathan, who brought me flowers and listened to my dreams. The money didn't change who he was as a person. "No," I said, taking his hand. "It doesn't change anything." But I was wrong. It was about to change everything. A month later, Jonathan invited me to New York to meet his family. I was nervous. Meeting your boyfriend's parents is stressful enough without adding billions of dollars to the equation. Jonathan tried to prepare me. "They're traditional," he said carefully, as we flew first class to New York. "They have certain expectations about who I should end up with. But I love you, and that's all that matters." The Wellington family estate was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It wasn't just a house, it was a mansion that looked like something from a movie. As our car pulled up the circular driveway, I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just wealth, this was old money. The kind that came with rules and expectations I didn't even know existed. Jonathan's mother, Catherine, greeted us at the door. She was elegantly dressed in a cream-colored suit, her silver hair perfectly styled. Her smile was polite, but cold, as she looked me up and down. "You must be Aaliyah," she said, extending a manicured hand. "Jonathan has told us so much about you." The way she said "so much" made it clear that what she'd heard hadn't impressed her. But I smiled and shook her hand. "It's wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Wellington. Thank you for having me." Dinner was an ordeal. The dining room was enormous, with a table that could seat 20 people. Jonathan's father, William, was a stern man who asked me pointed questions about my background and my plans for the future. His sister, Rebecca, who was about my age, barely spoke to me directly, but made several comments about how interesting it must be to date someone so different from our usual circle. But it was Jonathan's grandmother, Rose, who made me most uncomfortable. She was a tiny woman in her 80s, but her eyes were sharp as knives. She sat at the head of the table, barely touching her food, just watching me with this expression of pure disdain. When I mentioned that I was studying business, she actually laughed. "How quaint," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "And what do you plan to do with this business degree?" I explained my dream of starting a tech company, and I could see the family exchanging glances. Rebecca actually rolled her eyes. "Technology," William said dismissively. "Well, I suppose everyone needs hobbies." Hobbies. He called my dreams hobbies. I felt my face burn with embarrassment, but Jonathan squeezed my hand under the table and jumped in to defend me. "Actually, Dad, Aaliyah has some incredible ideas about democratizing business technology. She's incredibly smart and driven." "I'm sure she is," Catherine said with that same fake smile. It's just that the tech world is so competitive, especially for someone without connections. The message was clear. I didn't belong in their world, and they weren't going to help me succeed in mine. But I kept my composure, smiled, and made it through dinner. Later, in the guest room, Jonathan apologized profusely. "They'll come around," he promised. "They just need time to get to know you." But I could see the doubt in his eyes. And over the next few months, it became clear that time wasn't going to help. The Wellington family had decided I was a threat, and they were going to do everything in their power to get rid of me. It started with phone calls. Catherine would call Jonathan constantly, always with some emergency that required his immediate attention back in New York. Rebecca would post photos on social media of Jonathan with other women, old family friends who were single and available. The family's friends would make comments on my social media posts, subtle at first, then increasingly cruel. "Gold digger," one comment read. "She's obviously using him for money." "Poor Jonathan," said another. "He's too nice to see what she really is." The worst part was that they weren't entirely wrong about one thing. I was from a completely different world. I felt out of place at fancy restaurants where the wine cost more than my monthly rent. I didn't know the right people or have the right connections. At charity galas and family events, I was always the outsider, the one who didn't belong. But Jonathan never made me feel that way. He loved me for who I was, not where I came from. And slowly, I began to love him too. Not for his money, honestly. His wealth sometimes made me uncomfortable, but for his kindness, his humor, and the way he believed in my dreams, even when his family dismissed them. After we'd been dating for 8 months, Jonathan proposed. It was perfect. Just the two of us on a hiking trail in the mountains. No cameras or fanfare. Just a man telling the woman he loved that he wanted to spend his life with her. I said yes, of course, but I knew the real battle was just beginning. The Wellington family's reaction to our engagement was swift and brutal. William called Jonathan into his office and told him he was making the biggest mistake of his life. Rebecca posted a photo of herself and Jonathan from high school with the caption, "Remember when my brother had better taste." Catherine started inviting appropriate women to family dinners, hoping one of them would catch Jonathan's eye. But it was Grandmother Rose who went the furthest. 2 weeks after our engagement, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I was surprised to see her. She was the last person I expected to visit my humble Cleveland apartment. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into my living room. She looked around with obvious disgust at my secondhand furniture and small space. "Of course," I said, trying to be polite. "Can I get you some tea?" She ignored my offer and got straight to the point. "You're going to leave my grandson." "Excuse me? You heard me. This little fantasy of yours ends now." She reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook. "How much?" I stared at her, not understanding. "How much what?" "How much money will it take for you to disappear from Jonathan's life?" "1 million, 2 million. She started writing a check. "I'll give you $5 million to break up with him and never contact him again." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mrs. Wellington, I'm not going to take your money. I love Jonathan, and he loves me." She looked up from the check, her eyes cold. "Love? You think this is about love? You're a pretty girl from the wrong side of town who thinks she's hit the lottery. But let me tell you something. You will never be accepted in this family, ever. You'll always be the outsider, the one who doesn't belong. Is that really the life you want?" "It's not about what I want," I said, standing up straighter. "It's about what Jonathan wants, and he wants me." She tore up the check and stood up. "You're making a mistake. We have resources you can't imagine. We can make your life very difficult. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. This family has been powerful for generations. We don't lose." She headed for the door, then turned back. "You have 1 week to reconsider. After that, things get unpleasant." After she left, I sat in my apartment shaking. This wasn't just about winning over disapproving in-laws anymore. This was war, and I was fighting the most powerful family in America. I told Jonathan about his grandmother's visit, and he was furious. He confronted her immediately, and the family meeting that followed was explosive. Jonathan told me later that his father threatened to cut him off entirely if he married me. His mother cried and begged him to think about the family name. Rebecca called me every name in the book, but Jonathan stood firm. "I'm marrying Aaliyah," he told them, "with or without your blessing." The family's final ultimatum came a month before our wedding. If Jonathan married me, he would lose his inheritance, his position in the family business, and his trust fund. He would be completely cut off from the Wellington fortune. Jonathan didn't hesitate. "Then I guess I'll have to make my own way in the world." I was both proud of him and terrified. I loved that he was willing to give up everything for me, but I also knew what that meant. He'd been raised in wealth and privilege. Could he really handle living like a normal person? Our wedding day arrived, and it was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Half the Wellington family didn't show up. The ones who did attend sat in stony silence, making it clear they were there under protest. Grandmother Rose actually stood up during the ceremony and said, "I object to this union," before being escorted out by security. But my family was there. My mother, my aunts, my cousins. They filled our side of the church with love and support. And when Jonathan looked at me walking down the aisle, the joy in his eyes made everything worth it. We exchanged vows in front of about 50 people instead of the 300 originally planned. Jonathan's voice was strong and clear as he promised to love me regardless of what anyone else thinks. I promised to stand by him through whatever challenges come our way. At the reception, the tension was thick. The Wellington family members who had come sat at their own tables, barely speaking to anyone. I could see the disappointment and anger in their faces. They thought they were watching their heir throw his life away. But then something happened that changed everything. As we were cutting the cake, my phone buzzed with a notification. I glanced at it and saw an email that made my heart skip a beat. I excused myself and stepped outside to make a phone call. When I came back into the reception hall, I felt different, nervous but excited. It was time to tell the truth. I asked the band to stop playing and took the microphone. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," I began, looking out at the crowd. "I know this wedding hasn't been easy for everyone. I know some of you have concerns about who I am and where I come from." I could see Jonathan looking at me curiously, wondering what I was doing. The Wellington family members were watching with barely concealed hostility. "I want to tell you all something about myself that I haven't shared before." I took a deep breath. For the past 3 years, while I've been working as a barista and studying business, I've also been running a company, a tech startup that I founded when I was 23. The room was dead silent. Jonathan's eyes widened in surprise. "The company is called TechRise Solutions, and we create software that helps small businesses compete with larger corporations. You might have heard of us. We were just featured on the cover of Forbes magazine as one of the fastest growing companies in America." I could hear murmurs starting in the crowd. Several people were pulling out their phones, probably Googling the company name. What I haven't told anyone, including my husband, is that TechRise was just acquired by Microsoft for $2.8 billion. As the founder and majority owner, that makes me, I paused, looking directly at Grandmother Rose, who had somehow snuck back into the reception. "Well, it makes me wealthier than most of you." The room erupted. People were gasping, talking excitedly, and several Wellington family members looked like they were in shock. Jonathan was staring at me with his mouth open. "I didn't marry Jonathan for his money," I continued. "I married him because I love him. And I've been working undercover as a barista for the past 3 years because I wanted to understand what real people need from technology. I wanted to build something that would actually help people, not just make rich people richer." I looked at Catherine, who was sitting frozen with her mouth hanging open. "Mrs. Wellington, you asked me about my plans for the future. Well, I plan to use my resources to fund education programs in underserved communities. I plan to create jobs and opportunities for people who, like me, didn't grow up with privilege." Then I turned to Grandmother Rose. And Mrs. Wellington, you offered me $5 million to leave your grandson. I want you to know that I make that much in about 6 weeks now. But I wouldn't take it anyway, because Jonathan isn't for sale, and neither am I. The reception was chaos after that. Jonathan swept me into his arms, spinning me around and laughing. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I have," I said. "Just like I love you." The Wellington family's reaction was everything I'd hoped for, and more. Catherine and William kept apologizing, suddenly very interested in getting to know me better. Rebecca, who had been so rude to me, was now asking about internships at my company. And Grandmother Rose, she sat in her chair looking like she'd been hit by a truck. Later, as the reception was winding down, she approached me. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked uncertain. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I made assumptions about you that were wrong, completely wrong." "Yes, you did," I said. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. I've spent my whole life believing that money and breeding were what mattered. I thought you were trying to take advantage of my grandson. She looked down at her hands. "I was wrong about your motives, and I was wrong about your character. You're clearly a remarkable young woman." I considered her words. "Mrs. Wellington, I appreciate your apology, but I want you to understand something. Even if I had been just a barista with no money and no business, I still would have deserved to be treated with respect. My worth isn't determined by my bank account." She nodded slowly. "You're right, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." The months following our wedding were a complete transformation. Suddenly, I was invited to every family gathering. Business magazines wanted to interview me. The same people who had called me a gold digger on social media were now praising my inspiring success story. But the most important change was in my relationship with Jonathan. Now that all the secrets were out, we could be completely honest with each other. I showed him my company, introduced him to my team, and brought him into my world the way he had brought me into his. He was incredible. Instead of being threatened by my success, he was proud of it. He became my biggest supporter, using his family's connections to help me expand TechRise into new markets. Together, we made an unstoppable team. We also started the Wellington Johnson Foundation, focused on providing technology education and business resources to underserved communities. It felt good to use our combined wealth for something meaningful. Looking back now, I realize that the Wellington family's opposition to our relationship was actually a gift. It forced Jonathan to choose love over money, and it forced me to prove my worth, not just to them, but to myself. We could have had an easier path, but we wouldn't have had such a strong foundation. Grandmother Rose and I developed an unlikely friendship. She became one of my closest advisors, and I learned that underneath her harsh exterior was a woman who had been fighting to protect her family the only way she knew how. She taught me about the responsibilities that come with wealth, and I taught her about the importance of giving people a chance, regardless of their background. Today, Jonathan and I have been married for 2 years. We're expecting our first child, and both of our families are excited about the new addition. My mother and Catherine have become close friends, bonding over their shared love of gardening and their mutual pride in their children. The little girl from Cleveland who dreamed of building something important is now running a billion-dollar company and married to her best friend. But more than that, I've learned that success isn't just about money. It's about staying true to yourself, fighting for what you believe in, and never letting anyone make you feel like you don't deserve the life you want. The Wellington family thought they were protecting their legacy by trying to keep me out. Instead, they ended up with a daughter-in-law who brought new energy, new perspectives, and new possibilities to their family. And I gained something I never expected: a family who now loves and supports me unconditionally. Sometimes the people who try to tear you down end up lifting you higher than you ever imagined. And sometimes the family that warns against you ends up being exactly the family you were meant to join. That's my story of how I went from barista to billionaire bride. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, and subscribe for more incredible true stories. And remember, never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. Sometimes the person they underestimate is exactly who they need to respect. Your background doesn't define your future. Your bank account doesn't determine your worth. And love, real love, can overcome any obstacle, even a family of billionaires who think they know what's best. Thank you for listening to my story. Keep believing in yourself. Keep fighting for your dreams. And remember that the best revenge against people who doubt you is simply succeeding beyond their wildest imagination.